Story and Writing. This is James Cameron's third installment in the Avatar franchise. Avatar Fire and Ash follows Jake and Neytiri's family as they grapple with grief after the death of their son and the aftermath of Avatar The Way of Water. The film introduces a new and aggressive tribe led by an intriguing new adversary. As the conflict on Pandora escalates, a new moral focus begins to emerge. The story follows many of the same narrative beats as previous installments, with a few new wrinkles meant to keep the audience engaged. What worked before is undoubtedly present here. If you enjoyed the storytelling patterns of earlier films, you'll likely enjoy them again, because in many ways, this film feels like a retelling of the previous entry, just with the new set pieces, characters, and, well, heightened stakes. The movie runs over 3 hours with no built-in intermission. In classic James Cameron fashion, much of that runtime is devoted to spectacle and the immersive beauty that is Pandora. The quieter moments are never static, they feel alive and in motion, mirroring the natural world itself. Even when the pacing slows for story development, the film is never visually dull. What Fire and Ash lacks in originality, it makes up for in spectacle. The plot structure, pacing, and story beats are familiar, but the film still manages to take the audience to new places. That being said, there are several moments where characters are allowed to survive purely due to plot armor, or make choices that feel inconsistent with their previously established motivations. The ending clearly leaves the door open for another installment, which makes it feel somewhat anticlimactic. The recurring trope of the villain returning again and again also begins to wear thin. Still, the story draws inspiration from Native American history, biblical imagery, and historical depictions of humanity's ambition at the expense of others. And as for the runtime, I didn't feel the movie was overly long on my first viewing. The pacing felt adequate, and I was less aware of the length than I expected to be. However, I was underwhelmed by the ending. It didn't land with the emotional impact it seemed to be aiming for, and ultimately fell flat for me. It's clear the film was designed to set up future installments based on where the characters are left. Perhaps on a rewatch, knowing how the story unfolds, my perspectives might change. For now, I think the runtime is justified, not necessarily by narrative progression, but by the sheer amount of visual spectacle the film offers. Performance and characters. The characters are serviceable overall. Much of the emotional weight comes from Neytiri as she mourns the loss of her son and struggles with what path to take moving forward. At this point in the franchise, the villain's motivations feel rather played out. We're essentially dealing with the same antagonist from the first film, but without meaningful growth across 3 installments now. His fixation on making Jake Sully suffer feels repetitive rather than compelling throughout this film. The new villain, the leader of the Ash tribe, is portrayed as a loose cannon, and when paired with Miles, does add some nuance to the conflict. However, their motivations remain underdeveloped, and they lack the charisma or depth of villains whose arcs are meant to evolve across sequels. And after 3 films, Miles still feels largely like the same character we met in the original Avatar, despite his altered form. Maybe my expectations for franchise villains are higher, but I found that they lacked staying power. Direction and cinematography. While the story and character performances leave room for improvement, the film more than compensates through its cinematography and technological achievements. Exploring Pandora once again is breathtaking, everything looks stunning, and is a great experience overall. This movie is worth seeing for the spectacle alone. Watching Fire and Ash made me wish James Cameron would one day direct a Halo film, as his approach to world building is among the best the industry has ever seen. The CGI is phenomenal and continues to set the standard for future blockbusters. With that being said, it should be noted that according to the director himself, roughly 40% of the film is presented in a higher frame rate, hovering around 48 FPS, or frames per second. For context, most films are shot and projected at 24 FPS, which remains the industry's long-standing gold standard. A higher frame rate can significantly enhance the 3D experience, particularly in underwater sequences, making movement feel more dynamic, clearer, and noticeably smoother. James Cameron deploys the high frame rate selectively, primarily during shots with heavy lateral movement, alternating between 24 frames per second and 48 frames per second, depending on the needs of the scene. This shift is noticeable, especially in textures and motion, as the higher frame rate tends to smooth out the image, And for some viewers, this can create a video game-like quality, an effect that has been a common criticism of high frame rate filmmaking. While the change in frame rate is certainly noticeable, it never pulled me out of the viewing experience, and that said, this technique can be divisive, and I can easily see how it may be distracting for some audiences. Sound and score. The sound design and score are among the best I've experienced this year. The music amplifies the emotional weight of key scenes, and it's clear Cameron wants the audience to feel the film as much as they visually experience it. Whether it's somber moments in which characters are traveling from point A to point B, or high-stake action, the score always seems to aid what was visually being presented to us in a way that elevated what was taking place on screen. Final thoughts. Avatar, Fire and Ash is worth watching for the cinematic event that it is. While the story may not be groundbreaking, I'd argue that it doesn't need to be. There is something deeply enjoyable about simply spending time in the world of Pandora, and for me, that experience alone makes the film worthwhile.